I watched my boyfriend set down the lukewarm Thai takeout on the counter with that overly cautious look on his face, the exact expression he always got whenever he spent an entire commute rehearsing an uncomfortable conversation. My badge from Hargrove Medical Center was still clipped to my scrub top, and my hands were practically stained with black ink from signing endless department reports. I had officially been the chief of cardiology for less than 2 weeks, and I was completely exhausted. He cleared his throat, swallowed hard, and announced that his parents were expecting us for dinner this upcoming Saturday evening. There was a heavy pause before he added the inevitable catch, admitting that his father had no idea what I actually did for a living. I set my pen down on the kitchen table and stared at him, trying to figure out what kind of fantasy he had been selling to his family for the last 2 years. With genuine embarrassment creeping up his neck, he finally confessed that he had told his father I was just a resident in training. He tried to justify the lie by claiming he wanted his traditional family to evaluate me as a human being first rather than judging me through the intimidating lens of my professional title. His father had spent over 30 years as a respected cardiologist at Hargrove before being reluctantly forced into retirement during an aggressive administrative overhaul. He was an old-school physician who firmly believed that modern medicine was declining, standards were dropping, and young doctors lacked the grit of previous generations. He was particularly skeptical of female physicians in high-pressure specialties, assuming they rarely possessed the raw resilience needed for executive authority. Despite knowing his father held these narrow views, I agreed to attend the dinner as just a girlfriend, promising not to volunteer my title unless asked directly. The October leaves were coming down in heavy blankets as we pulled up to the massive colonial house in the northern suburbs. The place radiated old money and rigid structure, complete with manicured lawns and impeccably maintained bird feeders framing the front porch. The front door swung open before we even reached the steps, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with clipped white hair and the imposing posture of someone accustomed to absolute compliance in operating rooms. He extended a firm, evaluating hand toward me, sizing me up instantly as if running a rapid clinical assessment. His mother greeted us with genuine warmth, steering us past hallway walls lined with black and white hospital photographs straight into a dining room that smelled of roasted garlic and fresh rosemary. Lunch began with polite conversation about our commute and recent travels, but as the main plates were cleared, the interrogation naturally shifted back toward medicine. His father leaned back, swirling his red wine, and asked how my fellowship was going. When I mentioned completing my clinical training at Cleveland Clinic, he offered a brief nod of professional approval before steering the conversation toward his old stomping grounds at Hargrove Medical Center. He began holding court, explaining how Hargrove had struggled with severe leadership gaps ever since his departure, claiming the entire department had unraveled due to weak administrative oversight. With an air of unearned superiority, he declared that modern hospitals were elevating young, inexperienced doctors purely for progressive optics and diversity initiatives rather than actual clinical competence. He leaned over his plate and warned me that young physicians today simply do not understand the terrifying weight of executive responsibility, completely oblivious to the fact that he was lecturing the very person currently carrying that exact weight. My boyfriend sat completely frozen, staring down at his untouched bread roll while his mother delicately set her napkin on the table in quiet anticipation. His father continued his unsolicited lecture, boasting about how he had built the hospital's structural heart program from scratch and insisting that true authority required decades of sacrifice that young doctors try to shortcut. He looked directly at me with patronizing warmth, framing his condescension as valuable mentorship for a struggling novice. I listened calmly, nodding along with his points about institutional politics, letting him dig his own intellectual grave until he finally paused for a response. I looked him straight in the eye, placed my hands flat on the table, and calmly informed him that I fully understood the immense pressure of the role because I was the new chief of cardiology at Hargrove. The dining room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence so intense you could hear the subtle ticking of the mantel clock down the hall. My boyfriend closed his eyes in sheer relief, while his father stood frozen mid-sip, his face morphing through a chaotic sequence of confusion, shock, and total, humiliating realization as every arrogant sentence he had uttered over the past hour played back in his mind. He stared at me for a very long moment, his instructional tone evaporating completely as he quietly asked me to confirm my title and my age. When I told him I was 32 and had taken over the department 6 weeks ago, the rigid posture in his shoulders visibly collapsed. His mother broke the heavy atmosphere by casually refilling his full water glass, gently pointing out that my news certainly placed his speech in a rather awkward light. With all his bravado stripped away, the old doctor swallowed his pride and offered a sincere, deeply embarrassed apology for arrogantly lecturing his successor. I accepted his apology gracefully, reassuring him that I understood his passion for the department, which immediately shifted the entire dynamic from an uncomfortable interrogation into a peer-to-peer consultation. For the next hour, we spoke as colleagues, exchanging insights on recent robotic valve procedures and comparing the historical foundations he built with the modern innovations I was implementing. Watching his father ask genuine questions with newfound respect, my boyfriend finally relaxed in his chair, realizing that dropping the pretense had transformed a potential disaster into a quiet, deeply satisfying victory for everyone at the table.